Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. Today is episode 8 of Ansible Zero to Hero series. So this is a 14 episode series and till now we have completed 7 episodes in this series. Today is episode 8 where we will learn about error handling in Ansible. So we will start with understanding what are errors and failures in Ansible playbook. Then we will learn about some error handling techniques and best practices in Ansible. Like every concept that we learn on this YouTube channel, even this concept, we will learn both theoretically and practically. So this session will also include a practical demonstration of error handling in Ansible. So please watch this video till the end. It's going to be very informative. Before I start with the video, for anyone who is new on the channel, so the Ansible Zero to Hero series, the complete notes is available in this GitHub repository. For example, if you go to day 2, let's say, so you can find the complete notes of what I have explained in the day 2 video, along with the commands, along with the description of the commands. And if there are any scripts that are involved, even the scripts will be shared through this GitHub repository. So once you watch the video, you can use this GitHub repository as your revision material. So you can start this video, GitHub repository, fork it, and watch it to get the continuous updates. Let's move to the whiteboard and start understanding the order of execution of tasks in Ansible. Now, this is very important to understand before we move towards understanding error handling in Ansible. Don't worry, I'll make it simple. Let's say there is a DevOps engineer, and this DevOps engineer has written a Ansible playbook, a simple Ansible playbook where the DevOps engineer has defined the manage nodes, and assume there are only 2 tasks in this Ansible playbook, task number 1 and task number 2. And this playbook is associated with a inventory file where there are 3 manage nodes in the inventory file. Now we all know when the DevOps engineer runs the Ansible playbook command, this playbook will be executed. That is, the task in the playbook will be executed on manage node 1, manage node 2, and manage node 3. But the question is, what is the order of execution of tasks on this manage nodes? Now, this is important to understand. And how Ansible executes these tasks is that first, Ansible takes the task number 1. Ansible completes the execution of task number 1 on all the managed nodes. It can be 3, 10, 100. Only when task number 1, understand this carefully, only when task number 1 is complete and successful. Only when task number 1 is complete and successful, Ansible will move to the task number 2. And only when task number 2 is complete and successful, Ansible will move to the task number 3 if it exists. So if task number 1 fails, Ansible does not execute any tasks that are followed by task number 1. Now, this is very good. This is the default nature of Ansible, and it is good for many reasons. If your task number 1 has failed and in the playbook, let's say there are 100 tasks, what Ansible is doing by default, it says that, see, the task number 1 itself failed. Why should I execute other 99 tasks? It's waste of time and it's waste of the resources. Like in many ways, it's a good behavior, but in some cases, this can also be a problem for you as a DevOps engineer. Now you might ask me, Abhishek, what are those cases? Let's take a real world scenario, a day-to-day task of a DevOps engineer where this default execution nature of Ansible can be a problem. So as a DevOps engineer, you are given a task by a project team where the task is a configuration management activity on all the managed nodes or all the servers that are associated with this project team, all the virtual machines that are associated with this project teams. So they have given a task to a DevOps engineer. That is step one. Overall, what they want through this task is to install Docker, but they have some conditions. That is step one. First, before installing Docker, they want to make sure that the open SSH and open SSL packages on those virtual machines, if these packages exist on this virtual machine before installing Docker, this project team, for security reasons, they are asking DevOps engineers to make sure that these packages are with the latest version. Understand the step one carefully. Only if these packages exist on the virtual machine, they want the packages should be latest version. If this packages does not exist, no problem. You can simply move to step number two. That is verify if Docker is installed. So what they are saying is before installing Docker, you need to verify if Docker is installed or not. Finally, you can move to step number three, that is install Docker. These are the prerequisites that they have. Step one and step two, they don't want you to install Docker directly, but if packages like OpenSSH and OpenSSL exist, they should be of latest version. If they do not exist, they are not bothered. You don't have to install those packages. They are completely fine with it. So they came up with these steps and asked you to write an Ansible playbook because they have, let's say, some 10 hosts. Instead of doing all this manually, they ask you to write Ansible playbook. Now, in this case, the default nature of Ansible can create a problem. It can create an issue because, out of this 10 virtual machines, some of them might not have OpenSSH. And if they don't have OpenSSH, in Ansible playbook, when you write apt, that is Ansible built-in apt, and you say the name as, let's say, OpenSSH. Don't worry, I'm going to show you all of these things practically. I have also uploaded the demonstration part to the GitHub repository. So this is what I'm trying to show. So as the step number one, where I will write a simple loop, which we have learned in day 7, and I will say OpenSSL, OpenSSH should be in the state latest. That means they have to be with the latest version. I'll check this with the Ansible built-in apt module. Now, if on any host OpenSSH does not exist, step one will fail. That is, this task that you see here will fail if OpenSSH or OpenSSL does not exist on any of the managed nodes. And if it fails, the execution will not proceed with task number 2 and task number 3. Right? So if it fails, then the execution on that particular host, I'm not saying on all the hosts. If it fails on managed node 1, then execution of the next task will fail on manage node 1 only. So if this particular task fails on manage node 1 and passes on manage node 2 and 3, next task will be executed on 2 and 3, ignoring manage node 1. So this is a problem, right? Because you want to install Docker on all the 10 managed nodes. How do you solve this error? So this particular thing is called as error handling. Like in every programming language, even in Ansible, you have the concept called error handling, where if required, you can handle the errors. Actually, it's an error, but you can handle it saying that it's okay. Even though it's an error, I want to proceed. So this particular nature is called as error handling. And in Ansible, the syntax for error handling is on any task where you want to handle errors, you can simply write ignore errors, yes. Of course, there is other way also. I will come back to that one, but let's go step by step. If on this particular task, if I have to ignore the error, I can simply towards the end of the task write ignore errors as yes. And if you ignore, then even though the task 1 has failed on the manage node 1, succeeded on 2 and 3, it will still go to the task number 2 and execute on all the managed nodes. But the default behavior of Ansible is not like that. The default behavior of Ansible is that, I'm trying to explain this one more time because this is the core concept. If you understand this, writing the error handling is not difficult. So again, if the DevOps engineer comes up with an Ansible playbook, and within that Ansible playbook, if there are, let's say, 3 tasks, and there are 3 managed nodes. So if task 1, let's say it failed on manage node 1, manage node 2, and manage node 3, then task number 2 will not execute on any of the managed nodes. But instead, if task number 1 has failed only on the manage node 1 and succeeded on manage node 2 and 3, what happens with the next task? It will run on task 2 and task 3, but Ansible will ignore this host. Right? Ansible will ignore a host if at least one task fails on that. You are handling that situation using the error handling concept of Ansible. So that is what I am trying to show you here. So what I have done is within this particular step, I have added ignore errors as yes. Let's try to take a look at this practically. Okay, so what I am going to do is I will take my Visual Studio Code, and I already have 2 EC2 instances which are connected with the passwordless authentication with the Ansible control node, which is my laptop. We have been doing this from the previous videos also. If you just go to the running state, you can see I have manage node 1, manage node 2 connected with my laptop. Perfect. Let me create a new folder. Let's call this folder as, now I'm writing a new playbook altogether to show you the error handling concept. So I'll just call this as error handling. Perfect. In this, I will create a file. Let me call this as main.yaml. Of course, you need to have a inventory file. Let's call this as inventory.ini. And within the inventory.ini, because these are Ubuntu hosts, I'll say Ubuntu @ because the passwordless authentication is set up with the Ubuntu. So I'll just provide the IP addresses. Perfect. The inventory part is done. Now let's go to the main.yaml. And first, start writing the Ansible playbook, where the first step will be hosts all become true. What happens if I put become true? That means this playbook will execute with the escalated privileges using the sudo. Now, if I want to ignore gather facts, I don't want to run the gather facts step, then what you can simply do is you can say gather facts false. Okay, then it will not execute the gather facts. But let's ignore this and move to the task. The first task. So we had 3 steps, right? First step is to make sure open SSH and open SSL. You can take a reference of this one if you want to understand the task. So what I'm going to do, make sure the packages open SSH and open SSL are up to date. I need to say name, and here I will say Ansible built-in. What is the one that I have to use? Ansible built-in built-in apt. So I will be using Ansible built-in apt. And generally, if you have one package, you will directly define that package OpenSSH, and you will say state as latest. But here I am given with 2 packages, OpenSSH and OpenSSL. In the last class, I said it is better to write a loop. And within the loop, you can just define OpenSSH, OpenSSL, and just replace the name. And here just say item. Okay. Now what this thing should do, let's see what it does. Let's execute this. Ansible playbook -i -i inventory.ini main.yaml. Of course, it will start with gather facts. Now let's see the security updates. Oh, my bad. I was in the wrong folder. So I was in the Day-8 folder where the code is already available, but I should be in the error handling folder, right? So now let's try to execute the command again. Perfect. Let's see what happens with step number 1. Gather facts is successful. Then OpenSSH has failed. It does not exist on the managed nodes. So Ansible tried to update it to the latest version, as the state says, and Ansible execution has failed. But for OpenSSL, it passed. But however, both of these are part of one single task. Now let's see if we add a new task. After this, will Ansible proceed with task number 2, or will Ansible execution stop here itself? So let's write the next one. Name, verify if Docker is installed. Okay, this is my step number 2 that was given to me. So for that, I'll simply use Ansible built-in command, and I'll just say Docker ---- version. Of course, I need to complete this task, but for now, my goal is to show you. First, I'll show you what happens if this task will get executed or not, right? Because I said in the theory part, if your first task will fail, Ansible will not move with the second task. Let's see if that is correct. Okay, gather facts again. Now this has failed. And you can see Ansible did not even move to this task called verify if Docker is installed. How do you handle this? Because it was part of the requirement where the product team said, it's okay if OpenSSH does not exist, I'm not bothered. But if it exists, it has to be the latest, which we have done for the OpenSSL. So we are granted with the permission to ignore this error. And how do you do that? Is simply add ignore errors. Yes. Okay. So we are adding this field and the Boolean value for it is yes. Nothing like, just like true. Now let's see if Ansible ignores the errors in the task 1 and moves to the task 2. Again, starts with gather facts. Then, okay, this task, see it says ignoring the error, and it executed the other task, which is verify if Docker is installed. Perfect, right? So if you are handling the error using ignore errors as yes, then Ansible can move to the next task. Now you might say that Abhishek, but I can see some error here. It's quite obvious, right? Because on the manage nodes, which are the EC2 instances, Docker does not exist. That's why it simply says when you are running Docker -- version, it says that the Docker execution has failed. So what you can again do is simply say ignore errors. Yes. Now if you do this, you will see Ansible will ignore the errors in this step as well. But in the step 2, we have to do something more, right? I'll come to that point. Let's see this particular thing. First, in the execution, we can see even in verify Docker is installed, it said ignoring. There is no task after that. So Ansible execution has completed. If there is one more task, Ansible would have executed that. But now the question is, in step number 2, product team told us, check if Docker is installed. Okay. They said, check if Docker is installed. If it does not exist on the manage nodes, then install Docker. So if you watch this carefully, you will remember our conditional class where I have explained about Docker conditionals. Whenever there is a condition like this, check if Docker is installed. Only if Docker is not installed, move to install Docker step. So you will remember that in the conditional class, we learned that if you see anything like that in Ansible, there is something called as when. So here we have to use the when condition, and on the when condition, we need to see if this particular step, okay, if this particular step is throwing error. That is when the previous step is a failure. Docker -- version command, only if this fails. When this fails, then install Docker. This is the requirement that is given to us. And in the Ansible world, this is the pseudocode. Install Docker using the apt command when the previous step was a failure. That is Docker -- version. How do you do that? In Ansible, what you can do is whenever you run a command, you can store the output of this command using a keyword called register. So you can simply say register and provide a variable name. So I'm going to provide a simple variable name where I'll call it as output. So what happens is when you add this syntax register followed by a variable name as output, Abhishek, whatever you would like to, the output of this command, that is docker hyphen hyphen version, will be saved to this register variable. Let's see if it is true or not. Okay, for that, in previous class I have explained, whenever you want to print a variable in Ansible, you can simply use Ansible built-in debug and say var followed by the variable name. It will print and debug it. So I'll say output. This is just to show you, otherwise you don't have to write this piece of code, but just to show you that using register, the output of the command will be stored in the register variable. Now let's try to execute it. Ansible playbook -i inventory followed by main.yaml. Perfect. So you can see that the variable called output, it got printed. It's basically a JSON object, and what is present in the JSON object called variable. So it stores all of these fields where it clearly says that the command executed is docker-version. Failed is true. That means this command has failed. And then it also shows what is the error message. With what error message it has failed. Then it has std error, std out lines, all the things that are required for someone to debug a particular error in Ansible. So what I'm going to do in this when condition, I will simply say when output dot failed is true. So I can simply say, I'll write the new task. Okay, I don't need this. It was just added for the purpose of debug. So the step 3 is install Docker. In the install Docker part, I will use Ansible built-in apt, where I'll say name is docker.io and state is present, but only when output dot, what is this? Output dot failed. Only when output dot failed is true. So only when output dot failed, you can also say output dot failed is equals to true, or output dot failed. So when this condition is met, when the output is failed, then install the Docker. So why the output has failed? Where are we getting this variable from? We are using the register. In the register, we are storing the output of docker-version. Using the debug command, I understood what is stored in the registered variable, that is in the output. And looking at that JSON object, I have written this last task. Now let's see by executing it. Okay, I will simply execute, and my end goal has to be Docker should be installed on these target machines, which are nothing but our managed nodes. Okay, docker-version, it said there is no Docker, so it has failed. Now it said Docker is installed because the last task got executed and it clearly says changed. Let's see. Let's go to our EC2 instances. Let's go to one of these. Connect. And I just want to verify if Docker is installed or not. Please try to write this because, theory part might be clear, but until and unless you write this Ansible playbook, you will find it little difficult looking at the YAML file. But once you write it, you will find it very simple. Docker-version. So it says Docker is installed. By default, on the Ubuntu machines, you will not have Docker installed. So when you run Docker --- version, you can see it is successful. When you run it before this stage, you can clearly see that Docker --- version said no such file or directory. But when I have executed this task, it installed the Docker. And now when I do, I can see Docker is installed successfully. So this is how you can handle the errors. It's a very common thing of using ignore errors as yes as a DevOps engineer, because you are dealing with configuration of different virtual machines. So in some virtual machines, you might have a particular thing successful. In other virtual machines, you might have things not successful, and you might have these kind of requirements from your client or the project team. So you will use ignore errors to handle the errors. Now let's discuss about another simple concept. It's a very simple concept. In error handling, there is another thing called as defining the failures. What does this mean? Let me go to a EC2 instance so that you will understand this concept very simply. I'll show you this practically. Let me use ls command on a non-existing file or a folder. I will do ls Abhishek. So the error says cannot access Abhishek, no such file or directory. If I do ls on the root directory, it will say cannot open directory because permission is denied. So the ls command is the same. Here also I'm running the ls command on a folder or a file. Here also I'm running the ls command, but on a different folder or a file. The error is different. Here the error says no such file or directory. Here the error says permission denied. In Ansible, if you want to ignore a particular type of error, okay, both of these are errors because of the ls command. But if you want to ignore a particular type of error, you can use this syntax called failed when. Let me increase the font size. So we will use the same example. Let's say you do ls on a temporary folder or a temporary file. You can ignore when there is no such file error. Okay, if we go back to the virtual machine. So what Ansible documentation is showing us, for the failed when, you can use this kind of scenario, no such file or directory. Out of these two types of errors, you can ignore the no such file or directory error using failed when by saying failed when no such not in the result.stdout. So again, you will register for the ls command. You will simply register a variable to record the output of the ls command, just like we did in the previous example. So the output of this ls command is registered in this result variable, and in the result variable, which is a JSON object, so you will look out for a particular thing called as result.stdout. Previously we were looking at result.failure. Here in the result.stdout, you can say when the error is no such file or directory, or just provide no such. If you find anything like that in result.stdout, you can ignore the failure and move to the next task. So this is a special case of error handling. If you are using ignore error as yes, then all the errors will be ignored. If you want to handle only one particular type of error, for this, if you are using ignore error as yes, it will ignore both of these errors for the no such file or directory as well as permission denied. But if you are using failed when, then you can ignore either this one or this one by registering the output and on the output verifying using the particular string that matches the std out. So this is another way of handling errors in Ansible. You can try out the same example. In the ls, you can just provide a particular file name, folder name, or also you can use the same thing. This example is available in the Ansible documentation, and this is your assignment. Don't worry, if you find it difficult, let me know in the comment section. In the future classes, I will take this as an example in one of our practical demonstration and show this. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Please try to perform the demonstration. Do not just watch the video and ignore. See you all in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.